Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. Are you a member of a political party? Have you ever paid money to purchase a party membership? Some of you might say, no way, I would never give money to a political party. Well, what if I told you that you actually do? That regardless of your political involvement, your party affiliation, or even if you vote, that you actually give money through your tax dollars and through tax credits to political parties, both provincially and federally. Have I got your attention now? Well, according to Elections Canada, parties and candidates received $191 million in expense reimbursements for the 2019, 2015, and 2011 federal elections. During COVID, when the federal government was rolling out the various wage benefit subsidies, political parties actually applied and received the benefits, about $3.2 million worth. And are you aware that if you were to donate to a political party, you could receive as high as a 75% tax credit back? Way more than if you were to donate to a charity. And did you know that provinces like Ontario and British Columbia have per vote subsidies? This despite, in Ontario, for example, Premier Ford's promise to end the per vote subsidies in the last election. I guess another promise made, another promise broken. And not only is the subsidy staying for the time being in Ontario, it's in fact increasing. So, should political parties be subsidized by taxpayers? Should those generous political tax credits be allowed? Does this help or hinder democracy? Well, joining me now to unpack all of these issues is BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Kris Sims. Hi, Kris. How are you doing today?
Fabulous. Thanks for having us here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you. Lots to unpack here. And I know some of my viewers will be like, oh, a show on political parties and tax benefits. Why should people care?
They should care because this is their money. So even if they don't agree with anything a particular political party is saying, in places such as Ontario and British Columbia, your money is going to them. And I need to be clear, we're not talking about Hill staffers. So people who work on Parliament Hill for a member of Parliament, people who work physically at Queen's Park for an MPP, or here in British Columbia, people who work in Victoria for an MLA. No. That's all part of the official budget. We're not talking about that. We are talking about the Conservative Party headquarters, the BC Liberal Party HQ. They pay their staff. They pay market research specialists. They pay communication specialists to make attack ads, design the next lawn sign, make more junk mail during an election.
Yes, lots of junk mail.
Yeah, that's where your money is going. And I think a lot of people are surprised to hear that. And we're not just talking chump change here. Here in British Columbia, we call it political welfare because it's around $30 million so far in taxpayers' money going to partisan political parties.
Okay, in British Columbia, $30 million. 30. Yeah. Explain how and where is it going? And that's only in British Columbia.
Yeah. So here in BC, there's a per vote subsidy. So when you cast your vote, a certain amount of money goes towards a political party. I will point out, very similarly to Ontario Premier Doug Ford, the current BC Premier, John Horgan, had said before the election in 2017, I've got no intention of bringing in, a per vote subsidy or making taxpayers pay for political parties. Lo and behold, after he became Premier, in it went. So there's the per vote subsidy. And here in BC, once an election is over, 50%, half of their election campaign expenses are paid for by taxpayers.
Why? No, you have to stop me there. Why? Yeah. Why would the taxpayers be on the hook for campaign expenses?
That's a great question. One of the reasons and justifications given by political parties with their hands in our pockets is that, listen, we've gotten rid of huge corporate and union donations. So we've rinsed that big money out of the political system, and therefore we need to take it from average taxpayers. And again, the other kick in the pants is that here in BC, they said, oh, well, yeah, sure, we're going back on a promise, but it's only temporary. It's just a little fix to get us over this rough patch. And then we'll be completely flying on our own. Turns out, no, of course, they went back to committee and they've extended it now. So they keep on taking our money as taxpayers. And in Ontario, you're right. Current Premier Doug Ford had said, hey, I'll get rid of this. Not only did he not get rid of it, he's taking more money. And he's taking more money in advance of the next election in Ontario.
Oh,
so they passed a bill, taking it early.
We jump to commercial break, but I want you to unpack all this unpleasantness in just a few moments. Welcome back. We're discussing political parties and how much you, yes, that's right, you might be paying out of your pocket to subsidize some of their expenses, their campaign expenses, their lawn signs. Even if you vote, did you know that in some jurisdictions in Canada, when you cast a ballot doing your democratic duty, that you are actually also giving money from your tax dollars to a political party? Well, joining me now to help us unpack it all is BC Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Kris Sims. Kris, this is going to be one of those shows where I'm continually dropping my jaw and saying, really? That can't be. Really? But it is. Before we went to commercial break, we were talking about what's happening in Ontario, where we had a campaign promise in the 2018 election to say no more political welfare. We're going to scrap the per vote subsidy. Now we have the announcement that it's actually staying and it's actually increasing. Tell me more about this.
That's right. So Premier Doug Ford, before he became Premier, basically said, we're not going to be taking any more taxpayers' money and giving it to political parties. Not only has he broken that promise, he's increased the amount that they take. And this is the catch. They're taking it early. So usually with a per vote subsidy, that of course follows that you get it per vote during an election. But in the lead up to the next election campaign, you folks are going to be having out there in Ontario,
right?
They passed a little law there in Queen's Park, and they're taking it early. My colleague, the Ontario director for the CTF, Jay Goldberg, he calls it a payday loan. So they've taken out a payday loan.
So what do you mean they've taken it early? How do they know in advance how many votes they will get? Therefore, how do they get their advanced subsidy?
That's a great question. They're probably going based off of vote estimates, and hopefully they're lowballing and not overestimating how much they're going to be taking. So again, to be very clear, this is not for the day-to-day functions at Queen's Park, not the day-to-day functions in Victoria. This is for political party staffers. So no matter if you're a hardcore NDP supporter and you'd never vote for the PCs, your money's still going to them, and vice versa. You're as a PC party member, if you vote for them, your money's still going to the Liberals and the NDP.
Because we all pay it when we do our democratic duty. I wonder if this show is going to suppress voter turnout in the next election. Some people really just don't want to engage in politics, and that's fine. I sometimes don't even blame them. It can be a very, very dirty place. Okay, let's scale it back federally. So federally, do we have a per vote subsidy?
Not as of right now. And some of your viewers might remember what some people refer to as the constitutional crisis or the prorogation crisis when Prime Minister Stephen Harper was in charge in a minority government. In that famous shot of the now departed Jack Layton, Gilles Duceppe, and Stéphane Dion, of them all getting together in Parliament. They're all sitting there in that one frame. A huge reason for their uproar was because then Prime Minister Stephen Harper was getting rid of the per vote subsidy, basically saying, you know what, taxpayers' money shouldn't be going to you guys. Get out there and raise it yourselves. Pass the hat, get a KFC container and pass it in a church basement. We don't care. Just go raise the money yourself. And he was going to get rid of it, and they freaked out. And so it was kept alive for a little bit after that. But once he got a majority government, then it was finally axed much more quietly.
So will it come back under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau?
Let's not give him ideas.
Okay. Well, I don't think he watches my show, so I'm not too concerned.
I wouldn't be surprised. But they do already get a big, generous tax credit. And you alluded to that in your intro. See, it's pretty rough across Canada, roughly the same. But here in British Columbia, for example, if you give $100 to the Terry Fox Foundation, you get around $20 back in a tax credit. You give $100 to a political party, you get around $75 back.
Yes, I was a political contestant myself, and I remember it was part of my pitch, but not to the taxpayer, to donors that I knew. I said, hey, give me $400 and you get $300 back. And they say, how? I go, well, there's this thing called political tax credits. And who knew? And they're so generous and lucrative. How much do we dole out provincially, federally for these things?
It depends on how much they raise.
Right, of course.
It's in the millions of dollars. It's in the millions of dollars. So if you go ahead and take a look at how much people are getting back in tax credits when they donate their money, see, that's willingly. So, it's not great that they're getting way more than charities back. but it's not the same thing as directly taking from the taxpayers. At least then they're willingly giving their money and they're getting a tax credit back on their own dough. Right. But it's still, I mean, you try to make the argument that a political party deserves your money more than, say, the Terry Fox Foundation or Ronald McDonald's House for Sick Children and their families. Good luck with that. Most people would say that they don't deserve more money than those charities. And so
I think Canadians might suggest that if they were at least on equal footing, that maybe the political tax credit was lowered or the charitable was higher, then we could maybe consider that. But as it stands now, yes, it seems very disproportionate. Well, we're going to continue this topic when we return from this commercial in just a few moments. Welcome back. Joining me is BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Kris Sims. Kris, I feel like every time I have you on my show, I have some negative news coming our way with taxes and who's scamming what and whose hands in my pocket. Well, today's show is definitely no different. Let's change gears, though. Before the commercial, we were talking about tax credits, political tax credits, and per vote subsidies. One story that hit in 2020, and this is going back, almost 2 years ago now, was that, and I remember made headlines, was that political parties were collecting the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy, the CEWS, CEWS. That happened, right, across the board federally. But there was, I think, one party that held out. Tell me what happened there with the CEWS.
Isn't it interesting? So you can find all of this data on our website if you want to go take a look at yourselves. You can click right through to Elections Canada, CRA, all that jazz. So basically, folks will remember during the pandemic, the worst parts of it, they rushed a lot of federal money out the door. It was supposed to be one of those, oh my goodness, this is a huge emergency. Through no fault of their own, a restaurant is shut. So a waitress isn't able to work or she's on majorly reduced hours. Same thing for hair salons. Your hairdresser isn't able to get enough of the girls there in their chairs. And so she was having to have some help with paying her employees. That's what this emergency wage subsidy, most people thought, was for. Turns out the vast majority of federal political parties and a healthy chunk of provincial political parties took some of that money for their employees. And again, this is for people at political party headquarters, not people working on the Hill, not people working at Queen's Park. And it's to the tune of millions of dollars. The one federal party, as far as we can tell, who didn't take the money, the Bloc Québécois.
Really? Mm-hmm. Why do you reason that? I'm curious. Do you have any idea as to why?
That's a great question. It actually came up during the last debate. If you take a look back at the last federal debate, they seem pretty clear that, hey, we're going to, we didn't take the money. Have you paid it back yet? And we've been asking that now of political parties since they first took it. And we're getting crickets back when we're asking them, hey, that wasn't fair. You shouldn't have taken that money. You need to pay it back. Because most people who have ever worked for a political party know that you can do that job from home most of the time with a laptop. Right. This is not a construction site that was shut down. This is not a restaurant that was shuttered because of this pandemic. They didn't need to take this money, but they did it anyway.
My goodness. And now I remember that this was an issue featured in the federal conservative leadership. Yep. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought every candidate of the four that were in the final ballot or that were past the final threshold, they all committed to paying back that money, that CEWS money, if they became leader. Well, guess what? Aaron O'Toole was one of those candidates, and he is the leader. Did he pay it back?
Not that we know of. It's really difficult to get answers, as you can imagine.
Well, to me, that'd be something I would brag about. If I were the leader of a party and I said, hey, we had this money, but you know what? We're giving Canadian taxpayer monies back. I would have talked about that in the election.
You'd think so. But after the huge broken promise on like carbon taxes, for example, there's the phone lines aren't lighting up. So we're not hearing back from them, unfortunately.
Okay, and do we know what the final tally is of how many millions of dollars that these political parties netted from this program that was meant for the hair salons and restaurants?
We'll have to wait and see until all of the smoke clears, whether or not they paid it back or not. But we're talking millions of dollars. To give you an idea, here in British Columbia, as far as we can tell, and again, based on the data that we can see, it looks like the BC Liberals took the most of any provincial political party, more than $300,000.
Oh, wow.
That beat out Jason Kenney's United Conservative Party in Alberta, which also took some of this money.
Oh.
So typically parties that you hear talking about taxpayers and balanced budgets and common sense and doing the right thing, unfortunately, you still see them taking this money. And some of them may try to say, oh, well, it was technically allowed. It was within the rules. just because it's allowed doesn't mean that it's right.
Right.
And they should pay it back.
Well, okay, and let's talk about that for a moment. Now, I always like to see things from other people's perspective. So if I were running a party and the government, whether, say I was in opposition, it was the ruling government, said, no, you've got to shut down, lockdown, COVID's here, we need to get everybody home. Why should that business, because they're not for profits, I suppose, but political parties are sort of like a business. They're fundraising, they're marketing, they're doing their thing. Why should they be treated differently than any other business? There were massive organizations taking CEWS, not just restaurants and salons.
Great question. So we don't think the big corporations should be taking it either, especially when they're giving their executive suite big bonuses just before they sign on for these sorts of aid deals. So an airline, for example, that, days before they sign on to get major money from the taxpayer are giving huge bonuses to their executives that are already making hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's not okay. When it comes to political parties, these folks trade in ethics. They trade in what is right and wrong.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there because I think you're going to make an important point. We've got to cut to commercial. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Joining me is Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Kris, before the commercial break, we were explaining how these parties that took the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy, the CEWS, how some people made promises to pay it back. I asked a question, a lot of people may be asking that too, is, well, those are organizations, those are businesses, they employ people. Shouldn't they also have access to a program that other businesses in Canada should?
Well, it all depends on what kind of business you're running. And political parties trade in things such as ideas, ethics, philosophies. We ask ourselves what is right and wrong. And they ask us for our support and our votes so that they can have power over us. The power to write law, the power to possibly imprison us, depending on what the criminal code is that they decide upon. These are hugely responsible roles. And so that is why we hold lawmakers and their unelected bureaucratic counterparts in the departments to very high standards. So no, political parties shouldn't be taking advantage of these emergency wage benefits that were intended for average working people and people who employ them. And they know better. I'll put it this way. If they wouldn't door knock on this issue and say, hey, you know what? We deserve taxpayers' money in an emergency situation. You should be giving us money to our political party to pay for these lawn signs and attack ads. Can you support us in that? If they wouldn't say that to a voter eye to eye, then they shouldn't be doing it.
My goodness. But I think a lot of Canadians just simply don't know. So for any of you out there who are wondering, why, Tanya, are you doing a show on this topic? It's because I'm trying to wake you up and educate you as to what's happening. I mean, I know many of these things. I didn't know the amounts on a lot of these subsidies and tax credits and things like that. But it's quite shocking overall. So what would you like to see changed? Should the CEWS have been allowed to continue, but say excluding partisan political activities? How could things have been better with that? The Vote Subsidy, if we were to scrap it suddenly, say in Ontario, like Doug Ford promised, but reneged, how would that impact our political landscape?
So number one, the Vote Subsidy and the 50% reimbursement of election campaign expenses here in BC and in places like Ontario, that should be gone. It should be gone.
Yeah, that to me is a no-brainer. Why are we, you want to spend $1 million on a campaign and I'm on the hook for 500,000 of it? That seems strange.
It is strange. So here in BC, for example, $30 million, that would employ thousands of full-time frontline paramedics for 10 years.
Wow.
What's better? So in Ontario, similar sort of comparison could be made. So that needs to be gone like tomorrow. That shouldn't be going to them. And when they come to you saying, well, how can we raise money? Figure it out. We don't care if you hold a yogic flyer like Olympic demonstration and we all get to vote for you on some sort of Canadian Idol. Like, who cares? Go raise it. If your ideas are that good,
right,
and you're that compelling, people will willingly donate their money to you. So go do that. And when it comes to the emergency wage benefit, we'll try to give them the benefit of the doubt when they first rolled it out. It was an emergency. People were scrambling. They had to get it out the door. If they had sat there in committee for months and months on end saying, well, make sure we exclude the executives at some airline or, the folks taking advantage of it at a political party, they would have been hung up there for months. They expected people to know better. and what is right and wrong. And unfortunately, too many political parties seem to have missed that lesson.
Okay,
so now that they've taken it, they need to pay it back.
We only have 1 minute left. I know earlier in the program, you said that a lot of these jurisdictions and governments in Canada passed laws banning third-party advertisers, banning corporate advertisers. I know in Ontario, you cannot as a corporation donate to a political party. Again, 45 seconds left. Is passing something like that in the optics of ethics, I suppose that's why you would do it, is that actually shooting themselves in the foot because then they're actually on the hook then to want this taxpayer subsidy? We only have 30 seconds.
It could be. It could hinder their issue of free speech, right? And being able to speak up on behalf of a political party. So if you want to do that, we think that should be within your purview. Just stay out of the taxpayer's pocket. People shouldn't be on the hook for this stuff.
Right, right. Well, it's a lot to digest there. Again, it's not just the per vote subsidy. It's not just the campaign refund. Still find that shocking. It's the emergency benefits as well. It's very, very shocking. Yeah. Kris Sims, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So we discussed a lot of content there and how taxpayers are actually probably unwillingly engaged in funding political activity. Should that continue? How do you feel about that? Well, perhaps when your politician, your MPP, your MLA shows up to your door knocking for your vote, perhaps you might want to bring up this issue with them in the next election cycle. For Counterpoint, I'm Tanya Granick-Allen.